It's tough to beat playoff final weekend in the EFL. This is Not the Top 20's Championship playoff final preview, sponsored by Sky Bet and the Sky Bet EFL Building Foundations Fund. George and me, Ali, giving you some thoughts on the teams, on the managers, on the tactics, on the key players, and some betting angles as well. So this show, very strictly for over 18s only. Make sure that you are gamble aware. Head to gambleaware.org to brush up on the risks that come with betting. Now, what this episode won't contain is much Spygate chat, because we've already done that half an hour's worth of going through the situation with Southampton having been kicked out of the playoffs and Middlesbrough taking their place in this final against Hull City. We've given as much detail and as opinion as we possibly could have in a previous episode, which you can find wherever you are watching or listening to this. But George, preparations for Hull and of course for Middlesbrough now have been chucked up in the air somewhat because of Spygate. We'll set aside the drama, and the good news is that there's a really interesting football match to be played and a shot at the Premier League at the end of the rainbow, if that makes sense. These two teams have played 48 games across the season. We've seen lots of them. There's plenty to look at, plenty to consider, and I'll just be happy when the ref blows the whistle to start the match.
Yeah, we might have to re-record this if the appeal is successful for Southampton, but we'll do this now. Yeah, I mean, it's just not the game I thought we were going to be watching, which is quite weird to wrap my head around. And you have to kind of go into this wondering how the events of the last week, like we're not going to, as you say, go back over the Spygate stuff, but when setting the scene for this game, it's hard to avoid the kind of amateur psychology side of things, where like, firstly, what kind of a headspace are Borough in? They looked mentally and physically done off the back of that Southampton game, and not even off the back of it, in the last hour of that Southampton game.
In it. Yeah.
They were over. Like they could not do what they've been doing that made them so good. Whether that was the physical impact of having quite a small squad and playing a very expensive or very energetic style, whether that was mentally not being a group of players who could stand up to the kind of test they were thrust upon them. My own vision of them as a team was definitely impacted, like more so almost by that last hour than it was by how good they were in the first 20 minutes of the second leg and how good they were in the first half of the first leg. It was stark, and you know they played a lot of games. The back-to-back semi-finals come quite soon after the end of the season.
10 days rest at least.
Yeah, so
and from a
helps.
Borough point of view, in terms of preparation, they knew that if they were going to be playing in this game, it would be against Hull City, whereas Hull City have reportedly used the first 4 training sessions in their own prep for the final to prepare for a game against Southampton, and therefore they'll be pretty miffed about the change of opposition in that sense. Definitely.
And you know, it's something that's come out of all this stuff is that a huge part of match prep is preparing for your opposition. And there's a clip that's doing the rounds of Flynn Downs talking back in December about how well prepared Southampton were under Tonderecker, and that was because of they knew exactly what the opposition were going to be doing. But that, you know, it's a big thing, and the fact that Hull thought they were playing Southampton, and that crucially, you know, there's probably a misconception, I would say, within neutrals that, you know, that Borough and Southampton's playing style is similar because they are both kind of possession-heavy teams. They are completely different, like totally and utterly different, especially out of possession. So yeah, it's probably advantaged Borough in that respect, in terms of them having the monumental boost that they're suddenly reinstated in this game. That they, I was discussing with someone who the pressure is on, and they tried to say to me that the pressure's on Borough here. I kind of think it's the opposite. Like this, it's a free hit. They were done. They were out. They've already mourned for the season, gone, and now they've got an opportunity to get in the Premier League. Whereas for Hull, the situation remains the same. The opposition has changed. So it's going to be really interesting. It's going to be fascinating. I'm kind of, in part, kind of hope that Hull go up just so that we can get 2 games of Saints against Borough next season in the Championship.
They played each other twice in the space of 4 weeks in December, which is quite interesting to look back on, the 2 games in the regular season. The results were pretty interesting as well. In the first game, Hull won, Middlesbrough 4. It was early Hellberg days, I think, and they were pretty sensational, and Hull kind of walked into a real storm there. I think Hull were trying to fight fire with fire and learned that Middlesbrough's fire was pretty hot. It was 4-0 at half-time, and the game finished 4-1. But they made up for it a few weeks later. Hull went to Middlesbrough and they won 1-0. And in particular, they started that game really well. The first 10, 15 minutes, they were the better side, and they went ahead through Darko JB, and they saw it out. Panda had to make some saves. Of course, they faced a lot of shots. That's the case for any Middlesbrough opposition. But they maybe became a bit of a blueprint for how teams might try and play against Middlesbrough. Before we get into kind of, I guess, tactical analysis and talking about player and personnel, quick one on kind of, from our position as very interested and engaged neutrals, just generally wanted to consider what this promotion would mean, I guess, for both sides. Middlesbrough have been in the Championship since 2017-18, and even then, it was a very brief stay in the Premier League, just one season after they went up in 15-16 under Aitor Karanka. They've been in the Championship for, all but one season since 2009-2010. They have been in the playoffs 3 times in that period, and they have lost in the playoffs each time. The last 2 times they've been in the Championship playoffs, they've lost in the semi-finals. Obviously, they did, in a way, lose the semi-final this time out, but have been reinstated. So they have a very bad record in playoff situations. I think the last time they won in a playoff was actually a promotion relegation playoff with Chelsea in the early 90s, I think it was. So that will be in the mind of a lot of their fans, and that's the sort of thing that in the build-up to a game at Wembley where Borough have a very bad record and a lot of scar tissue, there'll be plenty of discussion, I think, around that amongst a certain portion of fans who think that sort of pressure or that sort of trend is always destined to be repeated. I think you and I are generally pretty strong on this sort of stuff, which is just because you've lost at Wembley, let's say 4 or 5 times, and this is the case for any teams, doesn't necessarily mean you will lose the 6th time. And there's plenty of examples of teams breaking such spells. So not something that I'm going to put way too much thought into. Hull, on the other side, I believe, have a very, very good record at Wembley, and indeed won the playoffs the first season that we were doing this podcast, in the 15-16 season under Steve Bruce, with Mo Diame scoring against a fairly classic Sheffield Wednesday team. So for Borough, it would be return to the Premier League at the end of a strange season, really, where one manager walked out on them after 15 games. And they got one who then they liked more, and who was doing some really exciting stuff straight off the bat, but under whom they ended up finishing 5th, having been in a pretty good position for automatic promotion at one point. And then all the hullabaloo around Spygate, I guess, has brought them all closer together. But, I guess in their context, you've got Steve Gibson, who is one of the great, I was going to say old school now, but kind of like of a previous generation British football club owners, the rich local fan who spends an awful lot of his time and money and ploughs it into his football club and oversees its development and its highs and lows over an awfully long period of time. And in the other corner, you've got Hull City, who have had a much more up and down decade since winning promotion to the Premier League, ended up going back down to League One for a period. Grant McCann brought them back up. Their time in the Championship has been fairly helter-skelter. Just last season, they only stayed up on goal difference. And they've an owner in Acun Ilicali, who's also a very important part of this discussion, a larger-than-life character. The Turkish Simon Cowell was a moniker that was bestowed upon him because of how he made and makes his money in Turkey, and has been, as an owner, a very quite an eccentric's the wrong word, but certainly a very front-footed owner. They've bought and sold a lot of players in his few seasons, up until the point where they had a transfer embargo last summer because of some late payments. I don't want to say a chaotic period of time for Hull City, but let's say a lively one for them, which has led to, after appointing Sergej Jakirovic over the summer, a manager whose experience in Bosnia and Croatia and Turkey was very positive, but who didn't know about the Championship. And that appointment could obviously have barely gone any better. I think for both of these clubs, as non-parachute payment havers as well, promotion to the Premier League would be completely transformative. For Borough, it would be the culmination of what's felt like quite a few years of trying to get there, doing the right things in the main, but not quite doing them well enough. And for Hull, it would just be a 1 in a million season, really, and an incredible chance to transform the future of the club.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you say around, what these teams have done and with prior managers and previous squads of players doesn't make a difference. And I know that fans are programmed to think, we never do this, we never do that. But like realistically, clubs aren't cursed with Wembley. But there is a part where Hull, in recent seasons, or in the last decade or so, basically every time they get a sniff of getting promoted out of the Championship, they do it. Yeah. Whereas with Borough have been trying to do it without ever really any jeopardy at the other end of the table, and have never been able to get over the line. And this is the closest they've got, albeit they've already fallen short, I would say, a couple of times this season. Like regular listeners will know, I love Kim Hellberg. I have a huge admiration for him and where he's going to go in the game. But his team, despite being the best team in the league, and that, I'm sorry to say, includes Coventry at times, not consistently, of course not, that's why Coventry won the league, but at their best have been more dominant over the opposition than any other team in the league, have still had quite a few opportunities to have landmark wins in their season, and consistently, apart from the 4-0 win over Southampton back in January, but even then, Saints weren't really much of a part of the conversation then. There was the game against Coventry where they went to Coventry as favourites for the title and lost 3-1. There was the game against Ipswich where they went to Ipswich, they were 2-1 up late in the game and they conceded a penalty and drew the game 2-2. You've got the
Millwall at home.
The game where they dominated and they lost 2-1. And then 2 games against Southampton where they had incredible moments within the game but lost over 2 legs in the playoff semi-finals. So for whatever reason, despite being an incredibly good team, they seem to have a bit of a soft centre. And even though I believe them to be a much stronger team than Hull on the other hand have been, pretty decisive when it's mattered. They won on final day against Norwich when they needed to win in order to force their way into the playoffs. They were brilliant over 2 legs against Millwall. Yes, the underlying numbers have been consistently poor for most of the season, but their last 3 performances have all been pretty good. Mm-hmm. Certainly against Millwall, they were by far the better team over the 2 legs, or certainly in the second leg away from home. And in this, in an era now where we have so many data points, underlying numbers served to us, we know that Middlesbrough at their best are a far better team than Hull City. And I think even though a lot of Hull fans get frustrated by how often the data is used against them, I think it's pretty hard to argue against that. Mm-hmm. But right now, in terms of who comes into this game in better form and in better shape, even though I believe Middlesbrough are a better team, I can see the argument why Hull might be a better fit for this kind of game.
In terms of the game itself, how you expect it to look, I'm interested in your thoughts. I've done my usual, really knuckle down, look at as much data and tactical bits and bobs as I can and try and come up with some interesting points to make. But I always like your perspectives and your bigger picture views on how this game might look, how it might play out in front of your eyes.
I think there will be a period early in the game where Middlesbrough are rampant. Mm-hmm. I think there will be, if Southampton couldn't stop them from doing it, and that wasn't by design. Tondreka said before the second leg, the first half of this game will look different to the first half of the first leg, and it didn't, because they could not live with the way that Borough were able to move the ball and the way they were able to flood areas of the pitch and find those overloads and find the ways to basically advance the ball into the final third so consistently. I don't think Hull will be able to live with that either. So my read on it is that Middlesbrough, I think, will dominate the first half as they did in both semi-finals. But I also don't think that means that this game is going to be done. I think if Hull can bide their time, if Hull can stay in the game and even go in 1 goal down at half time, there's no reason to think that Borough may not. There's no reason to think that Borough won't tire.
Yeah.
And if they can stay in the game, then I think we might see, especially because game state in finals like this is so important, where if you're holding on to a lead, you end up inviting pressure anyway. It wouldn't surprise me if we see the game completely swing in the second half, and I'll be intrigued to see which way the teams at Wembley who'll be shooting which way, because it kind of feels like the kind of game where one half might get quite a lot of the action.
It's going to be hot as well, isn't it?
It's going to be, so we're going to get some hot rain on Saturday.
Brilliant.
One for the old NT20 heads.
Most wonderful time of the year for
and
that.
Then so it's going to be warm and muggy and maybe a bit wet. Sunday and Monday are going to be scorchers. Mm-hmm. So that's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, this will be warm.
Bit of a classic cat and mouse framing is what I'd say in terms of how the game will play out tactically. Borough will dominate the football as long as the game is 0-0 at least. How much they dominate the football could be quite important here, because based on my analysis of Hull at 0-0 against possession-heavy teams, that's Middlesbrough, Southampton, Coventry and Ipswich, I think Hull will be happy and comfortable, probably at their most comfortable, if it's between 35 and 40% possession for them. What they don't want is for it to be 70-30 in the heat and with them getting pinned. there's a really important balance for Hull to find between being more than happy for Middlesbrough to come onto them, knowing that when they win the ball back, their best chances of scoring are attacking quickly in transition and making the most of their attacking players, a way that they've scored so many goals so far this season. But also, that has to be mixed with a balance of looking after the ball well when they get it. Because if they just go to attack quickly and directly every time, and if they don't get those attacks right, that first pass, that second pass, they are going to spend so much time out of possession. And if the weather is not great, if it's very hot, then I think that could be a problem for them if they are pinned and getting tired because they are spending so much time and mental concentration on defending. But obviously striking on the break is where they're very dangerous. You've mentioned the fact that Borough started both semi-finals really strongly and then massively wilted. It will be interesting to see if that is a theme or just specific to the playoffs. But even in some of the big games you talked about, the theme's pretty clear. Middlesbrough strong starters, not very strong in the second half, I wouldn't say, over the last couple of months. Whereas Hull, actually in the first leg against Millwall, they also started well and then wilted and looked completely done in the last half an hour. But in the second leg, it was the opposite. They kept it tight in the first half and they went for it in the second half and they won. And that leads me to talking about a massive call for Sergej Yakirovich. They defended so well in both legs and that back line was so strong. And that is obviously not how their season as a whole looked, where for the most part, they were fairly open defensively and very good going forward. They only won the semi-finals because they really got it right at the back. And particularly in the second leg, he changed formation from their normal 4 at the back, 2 in midfield, 4 attackers. He went 3-4-3. And I would say that for this game, 3-4-3 would be the pragmatic move if you understand what Middlesbrough's strengths are and if you want to avoid that kind of toe-to-toe, fire v fire approach, which did not go very well, particularly in that first league game. But doing the pragmatic 3-4-3 approach means you're likely leaving one or both of Gelhardt and Bellumi on the bench. And those two players, with McBurney, are seen as the stars of the team, the attacking stars of the team, the match winners, basically. So if you take that approach and one or both of those doesn't start, but for whatever reason, Borough's fast start leads to them being 2-0 up at half-time and you don't have a chance to get back into the game, you're going to be heavily criticised for taking what would be seen as a defensive approach, which didn't pay off. But if you do take that approach, like they did in the second leg at Millwall, and get to half-time at 0-0, and then you can bring on Bellumi and Gelhardt at a time where we've seen Borough fall away in games, and all of a sudden it wouldn't be a surprise to see things turn a lot in terms of how the game looks in the last half an hour, then you'll be a genius. So for me, these are the really interesting decisions that managers have to make. They're decisions that they have to take, and I'm looking forward to seeing what Yakirovich does here. For Borough, there's one massive question, and that is Hayden Hackney back and available to play? Murmurs that he is. Nothing more than murmurs. A 70% chance he's fit was quoted to me earlier by an unnamed Middlesbrough fan.
There's a tree I know that might have an idea. Thank you.
Very good.
Thanks.
Would be massive if he is. Would be absolutely massive. Partly because Tommy Conway is very much not available for this game, and not available for the World Cup, sadly for him either. So he's definitely out. In the semi-finals, we saw Dale Fry playing in the central centre-back position, and he stays at the back. But Luke Ayling and Melander, either side of him in this kind of nominal 3 at the back system, they both push forward very aggressively in possession into the next line, and they're supporting Aidan Morris as the kind of single pivot midfielder. So you almost get this sort of weird little diamond with Fry and Morris centrally, and then Ayling and Melander to either side of them, and it helps Middlesbrough be really controlled in their build-up and play through presses very, very well. Britton and Targett will be the fullbacks. They will stretch the pitch massively. I would expect both of them to have plenty of touches, and as is often the case in a system like this, the ability of Britton and Targett to impact the game in attack with progressive passes or good runs forward or crosses will be very, very important to Middlesbrough. And then ahead of that, in the semi-finals, they had McGree in the left 10 role, Whittaker in the right 10 role. Those two need very close attention. You need to be blocking off the passing lanes. It's not always, it's easier said than done. And then Strelec and Conway were playing as kind of split strikers, Strelec in the right channel, Conway peeling out into the left channel and moving defenders around with their movement at the top of the pitch. But with Conway injured, this is a big decision for Hellberg to make. If Hackney can start, he will come in for Conway, and he will play with Morris in midfield, not in Conway's position, but he'll be very involved in central attacking areas. Hellberg's made him play a lot higher up the pitch because he trusts Morris to do a lot of the progression that previously Hackney was doing. McGree, I think, will play in a similar role to usual, that kind of inside left attacking role. But my guess is that Strelec will play as the left side forward, peeling wide, what Conway's been doing recently. And Whittaker will play as the right side forward, kind of playing the only way Whittaker knows how, which is to glide around, wait for the ball to feet and see if he can get a shot off, and if not, pass it to someone else. If Hackney's not fit, who comes in for Conway? Maybe Gilbert? Maybe Gilbert. He's only been used sparingly this season, but in quite specific role, which could suit this game. A few months back, he was doing a decent job in central midfield areas, and it could be Gilbert, because the attacking options are not great for Borough. Sarmiento, Hansen, Castledine, all of those guys would be a more natural fit for a left-sided attacking role, but none of them have played well in a Borough shirt, to be as brutal as possible. If you wanted to go for a more dependable player, you might go for Alan Brown for his experience, but then you'd have to tweak the system a lot more, and maybe you don't want to do that. So Hackney's fitness is massive, and what Hellberg does, whether he is or isn't fit, is going to be really, really impressive. The key questions for me, George, that frame this game are, can Borough create big chances at will, or will Hull's backline stand up strong as it did against Millwall? If they do create big chances, will they take them, or will they waste them, which has been a theme of their last few months? Will they be able to maintain a performance level across 90 minutes, or will they try desperately to win the game in the first half, knowing that they seem to fall off and they don't have much off the bench? Will Hull sit and soak first half and then go for it second half with Bellumi and Gelhardt off the bench, or will they try and be front-footed with those guys in the first half and play to the strengths of their attackers, potentially leaving them exposed? I think all of that together paints, I hope, quite an intriguing picture of the game.
It does. And it's a funny situation to be in, having like one team who are the favourites in Middlesbrough, who basically seem to be the better team, and then the opposition in Hull, you've got Bellumi and Gelhardt and McBurney, and you're looking at them being like, wow, Borough could really do with those players, couldn't they?
Yeah.
Systems versus personnel. Because I agree. I mean, I think the Conway injury is a big, big blow for Borough in terms of what he offers, and there is not loads of depth to come off the bench, but B, there isn't loads of depth to come in for him. So, it's so intriguing. As I say, I think I'd be really surprised if Borough don't come out the blocks flying, but I'd also be very surprised if they can maintain that for the whole game.
Any thoughts on who will win, and more specifically, any betting picks for this game?
Yeah, I do think that Borough have opened a bit too big. In my mind, to win the game. There are two markets to Sky Bet. You've got the match result market, but you've also got the 2-up market. And Borough are 10 to 11 to win the game, but 5 to 6 to win in the 2-up market. And I'd probably take the 5 to 6 because of the way that the game might look, and because it wouldn't surprise me if we see Borough race into a lead and then game state turn it a bit. So I'd take that little bit of insurance out. Equally, I think my favourite bet of the lot is Borough to be leading after 10 minutes, which is 6 to 1. Again, just because I think the game is going to have a very fast start and it won't be as cagey as some others. Again, maybe because of the heat, it'll become kind of more dour as the game goes on. And then finally, if you're not necessarily sold on Borough, the 14 to 1 about Borough half-time draw full-time, or even possibly the 33 to 1 about Borough half-time Hull full-time. If you did watch those Borough games and you saw how massively their performance has shifted, especially in the second half, you could see that if they are knackered, if they are kind of a bit cooked, that might show in the second half. So the 5 to 6 about Borough to win the game with the 2-up and the 6 to 1 Borough after 10 minutes would be the way I'll be playing this. But I wouldn't put you off the half-time full-time either. Yeah,
I'm a guy that likes tradition, and this season's tradition has been to favour Middlesbrough and get against Hull City. So I'm going to do that with Sky Bet 11 to 8 for Middlesbrough to win and over 1.5 goals. Now, I've been on the wrong side of playoff trends already in this playoff season when I went overs in the first legs of the semi-finals and both of them finished 0-0. This might be like real, you're protesting too much, mate. But watching both of those games, the tactical style of all the teams involved, it was basically just poor execution that stopped goals being scored. It wasn't really cagey football, right? Which is kind of what maybe it has been in previous eras. Similarly in this game, even if Hull take a pragmatic approach in the first half and don't throw men forward in attack, I still think that the likelihood is that Middlesbrough will be playing quite easily into their final third. And at that point, they will create a lot of shooting opportunities. And maybe there'll be good opportunities, or maybe Hull will do their job well and get bodies between, the shot and the goal and create blocks and frustrate. But I don't see this being a game where both teams are happy to kind of ignore the first half, get into halftime 0-0 and go from there. Certainly not Middlesbrough. And in the last half an hour, based on what I've seen from both teams, I think there's a chance it gets unbelievably ragged, unbelievably open. If Middlesbrough are ahead, their strength is not sitting deep and soaking up pressure and hoping that they can nick it by a goal. They're still going to have a goal threat, even if they're leading in this game. And, equally, if Hull are ahead, then Borough are going to be, slamming down the door. So I don't see there being less than 2 goals in this game. So to boost my stance on Middlesbrough winning the game, 11-8, Middlesbrough and over 1.5 goals with Sky Bet is my bet for this one. Make sure that you head to gambleaware.org if you're thinking of placing a bet this weekend or anytime to brush up on the risks that come with gambling. That is our preview for the Championship playoff final to be played on Saturday afternoon. We'll be back with a recap not long after the game, and we will close the curtain on this incredible Championship season, which has been more than dramatic right to its end. Cheers and go well.